Thank you, Universidad Santo Tomás, the Bachelor Program, and the Board of Organizers of the Third International Moot on ELT Phenomena. Thank you, attendees. Welcome to the session titled Essential Transformations in Language Education. I am bringing today some lessons from a global milestone. I am Dr. Liliana Cuesta, representing the Faculty of Education at Universidad de La Sabana. It's my great pleasure to be here with you today. In today's session, I'll start with an overview of the subject matter. Then I will move towards the analysis, the baseline, and the depicted horizons. At the end, I will join you for a question and answer session, so everybody is welcome. What you will start seeing comes from different publications made by various sources. Last year, the beginning of this year, and the first one comes from UNESCO. UNESCO states very recently, March 19, 2021, that we had already moved and transcended 1 year into COVID-19 education disruption. They invite us to think about the place where we stand. The Washington Post in March 15 of this year stated that a pandemic year already, how the pandemic is reshaping education. The OECD Education and Skills Today report last year, by June, posed this question: how might the coronavirus crisis be affecting foreign language teachers? All of these questions bring us to some light and shed important ideas that we will be discussing today in the session. I invite the audience to consider those. Dudley Reynolds, on his report on language policy in globalized contexts presented at the World Innovation Summit for Education, he has a futurist vision. He states that there are many the opportunities for language education, and he moves from the pandemic to the post-pandemic world. He states, for example, that schools should do more than pass along the past. In his report, he argues that if schools want to improve their communities and begin dismantling social barriers, they need to rethink how they use and teach languages. They should challenge the perception, quotation, that some languages are more valuable than others. And you may well know that the pandemic exposed many social inequities in healthcare, living condition, and economical security, to name just a few. So he states, an open quotation, that we shall begin to dismantle the barriers with our communities that lead to economical disparities, and also, quote, those that cause us to see the person beside us as a worker, as a citizen, as an Arab, or as a black person, before we see them as a human being. Thus said, jobs, nationalities, races should never be ignored. They are important parts of who we are. So, having said this, we must realize that all jobs, all nationalities, all races, and all cultures contribute to the well-being of our world. So I invite you to think, how can we teach this? So my focus today is to start considering and start reflecting upon the roads that we have passed, the roads that we are currently in, and the road or the roads ahead. I would like you to think and reflect for a moment upon the following. If you have a person next to you and you have the possibility to access this resource while you are working with your colleagues or while you are in a group or with somebody next to you, consider each one of the following items and have a twofold perspective, you as a learner and you as the teacher. So let's get started. Think about, for example, a skill you didn't have before and you now have. And I'm again inviting you to consider before pandemic and in the current situation and in the current moment in which we are now. The second item I invite you to think about, it's a feeling you constantly sense it and how you manage it. And the last thing that I want you to think about, it's one challenge that you still have ahead. Again, you will have some minutes to consider these issues. Make sure, and if you want to, just journal it. I by no means bring today a reductionist approach to language learning. I really invite you to consider this proposal far away from this simplistic approach. And instead, I invite you to think deeply about the changes that we need to endorse in language education from now on. So, I am not only touching linguistic skills, to name just a few of the items. I want to go more and beyond the typical instrumental way in which typically language education has been squared or framed upon. Let's start by mentioning one of the biggest phenomena that has struck education, and it's the case of digital interactions. There is one initial variable, which is social media exposure. The figure you see on the screen comes from a Statista source webpage. You can easily access it, and this is from this year, early this year. And you will see the most popular social networks as of January of this year in users, naturally, and referring to millions. And you will see the leading one being Facebook. In second place, you have YouTube, WhatsApp, Messenger, Instagram, and then the list is long. You can just then have some minute or access the webpage to consult it. But if that year, the year of the pandemic, was and gave birth to this uprising situation in Latin America, the changes were also felt. Whereas the market share of platforms like Facebook and Pinterest mostly decreased in the region, I have to tell you that Instagram, Twitter, and especially YouTube rose to the occasion. And I am also making reference to the statistics presented by this worldwide organization. So let's consider, for example, this last issue that I was referring to, and it's precisely the rise of YouTube in Latin America. According to Navarro, from the same organizational source, the pandemic has forced people to stay home and avoid face-to-face meetings, and therefore it has brought to transformation in the way people use social media. And as he says, social media has become a recurring tool for long-distance socialization. In the largest online markets in the region, between 35% and 52% of adults who participated in a 2020 survey stated that the time they spent on social media was a source of happiness. Surprising, isn't it? Therefore, I have to tell you that I was also surprised. I wasn't expecting that YouTube played first in Latin America, but its exponential rise was deeply felt. And what you would see on the screen, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this face. I wasn't. It only took until this year that I started analyzing and studying this matter. And his name is the Herman Garmendia. It's the most famous YouTuber in Latin America. I have to tell you a few sources to get situated. As of March 2021, Canal Conzilla from Brazil was the YouTube channel in Latin America with the highest number of subscribers. You'll see the number on screen. Badabun, which is frequently advertised through Facebook videos from Mexico, ranked second and more than 44 million subscribers. Both Hola Soy Herman, which is the person that you see on the screen with all of these million subscribers, and Juega Herman are run by this person. So it has been such an exponential rise, and that has meant that the ranking of Latin American countries with the most YouTube users, it's not only coming from the country from which Herman is original from, but also Colombia, our country, Argentina, and Peru are also in the list. So, what are teens doing with YouTube? Practices, uses, and metaphors of the most popular audiovisual platform. State a fellow group of researchers that you see cited on the screen. And it is, by the way, the title of one of their articles published in the journal Information, Communication, and Society. These fellow colleagues are basically analyzing that YouTube has been ranked and preferred by users, and especially young audiences, basically for 5 reasons. The first one, it's because it is popular to listen to music, searching for downloading or storing music, playlists. Second place, TV, watching videos and news, following YouTubers and celebrities. Number 3, social, sharing content, making comments, getting social recognition, co-viewing and co-creating. More productive also function and approach is also used and mentioned, such as the case of creating and managing their own content. And last but not least, educational purposes. It doesn't rank first, but it ranks 5. Obtaining information and tutorials, learning by imitating, so on, so forth. In addition to this, the researchers found that the uses made by the platforms by teenagers vary in terms of their daily routines and the way in which they integrate the logics of YouTube in the various dimensions or of their social life. For the authors, YouTube is a means of communication and also a platform to acquire knowledge and skills, for example. So I have basically called this a resemblance effect. So let's talk a little bit about the implications. You are very well familiar with some of the icons that are, or if not, with all of the icons that are depicted on the screen. Snapchat, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Let's talk about them. I have very basically contextualized one of the biggest phenomena, one of the biggest interaction phenomena, and one of the variables, which is social exposure. Now, my question over to you: are learners using those in the language classroom? Because as I have depicted, they are using them in the real life. So I invite you to think about whether they are using these type of sources or not. And if they use them, how do they use them? Why do they use them? Think about some of these questions and take a minute either to journal, to take notes, or to discuss them with your peer if you have somebody next to you, or feel free to make and take your notes and then share them with somebody either in your group or with a teammate. Consider, for example, how reluctant, afraid, comfortable you are in using these tools for the many purposes, for your personal purposes and also for your classroom purposes. How familiar you are with the tools and how comfortable you are in allowing your students to use them. Think also, for example, if you are examining what is behind such use. What is the required infrastructure? What are the technicalities associated to that? Do students have access to the latest technology of smartphones? How are they using it in the real life? And for the learning, one of the learning purposes or many of the learning or use purposes that were depicted 2 slides ago. What are the benefits of use? Could be another consideration. What are the derived pros, cons, perceived and derived gains? How can YouTube, for example, be seen, read, and analyzed as a complex, multi-author, multimodal text which emerge dynamically from processes of textually mediated social interaction, as quoted by Benson, our renowned Phil Benson, early in 2016. So, if we start looking ahead from the baseline, we could have 6 items in mind. Let me get started with the first one, which is digital skills. Our students are not the same they were 2 years ago. Consider that. And regarding digital skills, they have either learned about new learning and digital skills, or they have mastered digital contexts and multiple ways to use, transfer, and represent knowledge. Now, take the second aspect into consideration: autonomous and self-regulatory practices. They might have gained understanding of what it means to be studying at home and without the physical presence of the instructor. They might have had a feeling of integrating parents and family into their schooling process. Are they small steps? Are they solid steps? In third place, consider the infrastructure, as I was mentioning before. Students at this point have had access to new routes. I'm not only talking about the technicalities again and the sources. I'm talking about access derived from the use and naturally the exposure to these sources, to new routes and resources to learn during the confinement period. Now, again, in this continuum and in this pathway, think, for example, that the conception of the world perhaps has shifted in your students. They might have experienced that the world is small and it has never been that close to talk to somebody who's abroad. Also, consider that your students may have also gained some understanding that English is the lingua franca, that a lot of documentaries are depicted and used and translated to English only, and that these are available in Netflix, for example, or in any other of the platforms like Disney Plus, just to mention a few of them. Now, one of the most important aspects that I want you to consider in this presentation, and it's the social emotional curve. Students have moved along the continuum that I was referring to, and along this continuum, they might have felt and experienced feelings of loneliness, stress, anxiety, lack of motivation and or engagement. They might also have strengthened bonds with friends and family. So, not everything is negative. I don't want you to take a non positive look to things. I'm just inviting you to consider all of the 6 elements, just to name some of them, that may have a direct influence in the way your language student, and you're a student first, then a language learner, has lived throughout this time. This has been the perfect plateau to start talking about one of the strategies, if I may say, that that these new literacies and these new ways to create, produce, represent, and digest content is very well noted. It has long been said that digital stories are a useful instructional tool for language teachers, not only because students can foster their creativity and their language skills, but also because they generate interest and motivation for the so-called digital generation, and especially for any struggling language students. Nowadays, if you think about it for a second, there is a myriad of applications that can support language instruction, especially in cases in which any language difficulty has been assessed. According to many authors, but I will just only cite Andrea Spagat from the West Coast Region Director at the Center of Digital Storytelling, using digital stories is a fantastic resource for heterogeneous classes. Not only for that, but storytelling allows students to create, represent their world verbally. In different situations and different types of learners and of human beings, storytelling can be the means of expression to unveil all of the emotions and feelings that, for example, dislocated and isolated people may have had in the case of an immigrant or a refugee. Thus, strengthening social ties among students will also lead to greater emotional safety and more participation in learning activities, according to the author I referred to. There are multiple ways to represent knowledge. There are multiple ways to use literacies in the classroom. Storytelling is one of them. And if we keep diving on that, we lead towards transmedia literacies. And transliteracy, according to the Horizon 2020 project, whose principal investigator is Carlos Escolari, from Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, they state, and this is a group of researchers, they state that the Transmedia Literacy Project assesses the ways in which young boys and girls are learning skills outside school. The construction of those cultural competences and social skills will be at the center of the research. So once they assess how do they learn, they expect to analyze the strategies and practices applied by them outside formal institutions, because learning cannot be confined to the classroom. The classroom can be everywhere. So this ubiquitous feeling, it's now more and more deeply felt. So transmedia literacies, as you see on the screen, create these elements as the ecosystem of learning. They lead towards engaging, lifelong, personalized, practical, and equitable learning opportunities. So looking ahead, and according to Castells, there is a technological and a cultural gap between today's youth and the school system that unfortunately hasn't evolved along with the society and the digital environment. And you'll have this video to interact later. So basically, this Horizon 2020 project, it's focusing on investigating the relations between media, technology, and education, and analyzing the boundaries, but together, not only the boundaries, but the opportunities. And at this time, I want to touch the horizon and this pathway that I am also presenting to you today. I argue that classrooms are not brick and mortar units anymore. I advocate and I strongly believe that reaching a better understanding of how learners are consuming, producing, sharing, creating, and learning in digital environments, also bringing the Transmedia Literacies projects to the table, will enhance teachers to build instruction and learning around solid, purposeful, and engaging means and environments, which will be essentially facilitating effective knowledge use, production, and transfer. So what do we need? And we are moving to the end of the video. We need multisensory opportunities. We need adaptable opportunities. We need to create an ecosystem that is supported by families, by employers and business, by social and community institutions. We need to create an ecosystem that gives opportunities for out-of-school programs, for support from health and social protection agencies, naturally counting on a solid infrastructure and with technology itself. So towards the end, I would like to leave you with some of the ideas mentioned in the document created by UNESCO. And I have to tell you that a post-COVID framework has not yet existed, but there are principles that we have learned, that we have endorsed, and that we are really constantly examining in our classrooms. The language classroom is no longer the classroom in which drilling was made, in which the four skills were worked, in which the audiolingual or the grammar translation method were at the top of the agenda. Instead, my proposal, as you would see, and you have seen over these minutes, state in alignment with the worldwide principles of equitable learning brought by UNESCO, a different proposal to language education, a cross-curricular proposal, a multidisciplinary approach that visualizes, for example, educators as decision makers, that at the same time appreciates students as active actors with rights, that recognizes the value and the specificity of the school space, but without confining it or restricting it. Instead, by addressing the dilemmas around technology's ability to serve as an equalizer of opportunities. and an ecosystem that revisits educational content for the sustainability of younger generations.